Let's take a look at how Business Central can help us manage our material requirement planning. The system has several worksheets related to material requirement planning. We're going to focus primarily today on planning worksheets, but it's not worth noting that there is also a requisition worksheet and a subcontracting worksheet. So if, for instance, you have subcontracted operations and you need to plan sending components out to those subcontractors, receiving back those components after a subcontracted operation, the contractual arrangement with the subcontractor, such as how you're paying them. Is it per unit? Is it based on time? We can help you manage those as well. So let's take a look at the planning worksheet. We can have unlimited planning worksheets, so we can kind of be working in a what-if mode prior to confirming the creation of documents based on that particular plan. Right now, I only have one scenario set up, and I have nothing appearing. That's simply because I haven't ran the preparation. So there's a step called Calculate Regenerative Plan, which is going to look at all the supply and demand and the particular rules or order policies that you have against those particular items, things like preferred vendors, multiples, minimums, etc. So I'm going to look at both MPS and MRP in this particular run. I could do them individually or I can do them combined. And I'm not using a forecast, but we can create forecasts for items that will be taken into account in the material planning. And I'm filtering it for one particular warehouse. Business Central calls these locations. So we are a multi-warehouse solution. In this case, I'm looking at just one location. I'll go ahead and it'll make a calculation based on demand, supply, current inventory levels, when those items are needed, and it's going to make what are essentially a series of suggestions to us. So it can propose different action messages. Right now we're only seeing new, but we could also see things like change the quantity, reschedule, cancel a particular purchase order or production order, etc. So we see here that it's asking us to create a production order for a bicycle for 100 units, and it's also asking us to create another order for a bicycle for 50 units. And we can see here the dates that those are required. They're actually required essentially a few weeks apart, about 2 weeks apart. So there are rules in the order policies that we can set up to decide to merge demand into one production order or one purchase order when it's within a certain time period. We'll take a look at that a bit later. For now, if we want to understand really where that's coming from, we can always drill down to order tracking, which is going to show us that there's no untracked quantity. So what untracked quantity would be things like safety stock. So if I had said I always want to have 10 bicycles in stock, even if I had no demand, it would suggest I produce 10 and it would be listed under untracked. I could drill down, it would tell me why I have an untracked quantity that I need to cover. Here we see that there's a sales order with a particular start and ending date. So it says we need to have this ready for the 22nd of May. If I drill down and take a look at that particular customer order, we see that they're asking for delivery on the 23rd. So that's a system setting. I can say, you know, make sure it's ready a day before or 2 days before or 3 days before. And we see here the quantity is indeed 100 and we need to ship that out to a customer called Microsoft. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. We could do the same thing and take a look at where this particular one is coming from. Now, these are we also see here some other production orders. So these are fabricated subassemblies of my bicycle. The back wheel, the chain assembly as an example, it's suggesting we create production orders for. And you can see the dates are a day before. So because I got to make the bicycle on the 22nd, I need to make sure that on the 21st, I have finished the production order of the back wheel. And things like lead time are always taken into account. So we may have particular lead time periods for those items. Then finally, we have some purchased items. And again, we're seeing the lead time taken into effect, and it's calling for those items for the purchase order to be sent out well in advance based on the particular lead time for that particular item that we've configured in the system. And again, it's not grouping them. There, as I said, there's settings we can do to suggest that it pull that information together. So let's take a look at the mudguard front. We'll drill into the item master record for that particular item. And I'll go into edit mode. And when we go down to first the replenishment, we see here we specify how we replenish an item. Is it purchased? Is it a production order? Is it assembly? We can also make some determinations on whether or not it's make to stock or make to order or assemble to order or make to order. So we can manage those different modes. Drilling down a little bit, we have different order policies available to us. There's a bit more deeper explanation needed than I want to cover today in terms of when you would use each case. But for now, I'm using lot for lot, which basically means for each unit of demand, create 1 unit of supply. However, I also have the option here to use what's called a lot accumulation period. So if I change that to 1 month, the system is going to group the demand for that mudguard into one purchase order that will come in when the first mudguards are needed for that first production order. It's also important to note that we have what are called stock keeping units available for the items. A stock keeping unit is essentially the settings specific to a warehouse that we might need for a particular item. So if I look at the blue location, that's not the location where our demand's coming from, so it doesn't apply to us right now. But if I needed different rules, for instance, maybe I purchase it but from a different vendor, maybe the lead time is different, maybe I get it from another one of my locations. So maybe I have one production location that produces the mudguards, and any other location or warehouse that needs it would order it from the other location or other company, potentially if you're multi-company. And then I can also adjust those order policies by warehouse and by location. That simply makes good sense. So let's go drill out of our item. We've made that change. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to recalculate the plan. And I would expect to see the front mudguard get merged into a suggestion for a single purchase order. So now if I look at the front mudguard, I do indeed only have 1 line. I no longer have 2 lines, and I have a quantity of 150. So that's simply an example of how you can use these order policies to get the system to follow the rules you like to apply to replenishing items, both purchased, manufactured. Next, we're going to take a look at when and why we might receive different types of action messages. So right now, we have no inventory in that warehouse whatsoever, and we've got 2 customer orders that we looked at that are driving demand for us to produce bicycles. And the demand for those bicycles is driving demand to produce some fabricated sub-assemblies, as well as purchase the material needed to make those. But as I mentioned, we can see different types of messages. So first, what we're going to do, you'll notice here the system's accepted all these action messages. The only time they won't be pre-accepted is if there's a particular warning that the system says, hey, wait a second, you need to take a really good look at this. That said, we can untick action messages that we don't want to proceed with right away. And we can also make changes. We could decide to change the quantity. As an example, I could decide, oh, I want to buy a little more. Or we could change the date, or we could change the particular vendor on an item. So we have a bit of flexibility before we confirm those action messages. But I'm going to go ahead and carry out those action messages. What the system is actually going to do in the background is create production orders, and I can choose in what status I want to create those, firmed or planned. Those different statuses are typically used if you need to review a document by somebody before actually releasing it. So maybe you want an engineer to look at the production order before it goes to the shop floor. We can create same thing with assembly orders if we had any here. Same thing with purchase orders. We could tell it to combine transfer orders, so group them together if we're doing a stock transfer between two locations. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and the system's going to carry out those action messages. Essentially what happens is it's creating purchase orders and production orders. So as long as I've defined things like preferred vendors and my pricing for those items with those vendors, those are going to get created in the background. Now, if I go back and I make a change to the original demand, so let's say I take a look at the sales orders that were involved. So if we remember from earlier, we had two sales orders involved, the 1040 and the 1041. Let's go ahead and open those up. We can see here that the 1040 was originally requested for May 23rd. And if we go next, we'll see that the 1041 was originally requested for May 30th. I've gone ahead and created those orders. What would happen if I changed the due date? And I brought it in within a week of the first one. So I'm going to make it the 20th. And I'll update the requested delivery date, and it'll ask me if I want to update the lines. I'll go ahead and say yes. So we've brought that demand forward essentially. When we go back to the planning worksheet, and if I go ahead and recalculate the plan, we should see some changes that the system is asking for. So we do see some interesting changes. So the mudguard front, it's actually, remember we told it to combine that within a certain period. So we only have one order for the mudguard front, and it's asking us to change the quantity on that particular order. We're still within the lead time. We could go ahead and make a change to that quantity. The reason here is not because of the change we just made. The reason is I had modified that and told it to order 200, but based on the rules I have in the system and the demand and supply, I don't have any safety stock that I keep in stock on that item. We can see over here in the order policies, there's really no safety stock. So the system's saying, hey, why are you bringing in that extra 50? Basically, that's because of the manual change I made before I confirmed those orders. Then we start to see a reschedule option on an existing purchase order. So it's no longer a plan, but there's actually a purchase order now, and it's saying, hey, you need to reschedule that. Why do I need to reschedule that? Because we gave the system in the order policy the option of rescheduling rather than canceling POs and suggesting the creation of new ones whenever it was within a 2-week window. So because we brought that forward a little more than a week, it's saying, hey, really, this should be rescheduled at this particular point. And we even have some where we don't have a rescheduling period set up. So it's telling us to cancel the order that exists for 50 and create a new order for 50 to come in earlier. Because in this case, with that vendor perhaps, or with that particular item with that vendor, it's just really not an option to reschedule. But perhaps canceling the purchase order and issuing a new one is. So we can see how the MRP really helps us manage by exception. It's really giving us the exceptions we need to look at. And as things change, of course, customer orders ask for changes to delivery date. Of course, vendors tell you that they can't deliver on the date you originally requested. As those things happen, the system is going to help us manage by exception. Now, we can also view, if we really want to understand a particular suggestion and why it's happening, we can look at our item availability in the system lots of different ways. But one of the ways is by event. So when we look at it by event, we can see here clearly what's happening across the system. So it's saying the first event is going to be on the 5th. And on the 5th, we have a new production order being requested because of a new component demand. If we look at one of our more purchased items, let's say the brakes, we'll see that it's not talking about production orders here. It's talking about the purchase orders. So we can see here that on the 5th, we need some breaks to be brought in. We can drill over to the right, and we can drill over to the right, and we can see what we have projected available, what the gross requirement is, and what the action message was. So that first line, we need 100. The second line is bringing in 100. We're minus 100. So it's suggesting that we bring in 100. So we can really understand the calculations here. Right now, I'm saying to include the planning suggestions. So include things I haven't done yet that the system's suggesting. But I can also filter it off and say I don't want to include those planning suggestions if I want to see the current status before the suggestion I'm looking into deeper. So that's a quick look at how the material requirement planning system in Business Central works and how it can help you manage by exception and help you by making changes to documents in a more automated way. Rather than having to drill into those purchase orders and reschedule them, I can simply now accept those action messages.